So, it's been a while since I've attempted to make any sort of content. I wanted to film this because lately I've been stuck in my own head about being behind in life. And if you are too, here's what I've been trying to remind myself of. I'm Max. I'm a first generation Chinese transplant from SF living in San Diego. Until earlier this year, I was a project manager for over 10 years in big tech, and I've also been an on and off online fitness coach. First off, I wanted to get into where that feeling of being behind comes from. A lot of it is due to social media distortion. We all know by now that what we see on Instagram, on TikTok, on whatever, is very curated. It is the highlight reel of everyone's life. And yet, we can't help but compare ourselves to it. That's where a lot of the insecurity and self-judgment can come from, even if we're conscious of that's what's happening. And in the meantime, layoffs are everywhere. I know in the tech job market, things have been getting bad and worse for the last at least 3-ish years due to changes in the tax code, to the rise of AI and LLMs, offshoring, and a whole variety of other factors. The job market has really just fallen out from under the bottom for new grads and even like senior people who've been in the field for a really long time, who are struggling to find their way and struggling to figure out, do they keep on pushing to get back to where they were before, or do they need to drop levels, accept lower compensation, or reinvest, reskill in some completely new field? So if that's something you're going through, you're certainly not the only one. And friends are moving on with life. I had very close friendships in my 20s, back when I was living in San Francisco. I felt very fulfilled for a number of years through even the beginning of the COVID era. But as life happened, folks got married and moved and went our separate ways and just really diverged into kind of a different life circumstances. It just wasn't as organic and naturally occurring anymore for us to be hanging out, to be spending time together, to be having any sort of shared experiences. And when you add starting families and add monetary milestones to the mix, compared to back in college times when everyone was kind of starting out roughly at the same place, now as 10-15 years go on, some people are much further along in their lives in terms of the levels they've attained, the compensation they've attained in big corporate or their own business, whatever they may be doing. And you have all these different ways of, you're just not living the same lives as your friends anymore. And so even with a level of effort and the desire to keep those relationships and keeping them going, the circumstances just don't really lend themselves to it quite as readily as they used to. And finally, there's the fitness and dating comparison traps. And this kind of goes back a little bit too to what I was mentioning before about the social media distortion, what you see when you open up IG, when you watch TV or consume any sort of media. I don't know about your feed necessarily, everybody's algorithm is a little bit different, but it's just so common to have this shared experience where we're bombarded by content of couples being successful, people having their best shape and their best health in the gym, all selling you this dream through coaching, through some kind of boot camp, through some other form of monetization that they've attached to that persona and to that content. And the more time you spend consuming that information, and there's almost an inevitable comparison that you draw to yourself and where you're at, and that sense of lacking is precisely what a lot of those content is depending on to convert, so that for you to buy into the solution that for this lack that they've created. Now that I've talked about the sources of that sense of feeling behind, I want to get into a little bit of why it's not always necessarily true. There's no universal timeline for these things, Everybody's life is on a different trajectory. Everybody's got different circumstances. Even if you don't have the same money in the bank cash saved up, it doesn't mean you've made bad choices up until this point. There may be necessary life circumstances along the way where you made the best decision you could at the time that in retrospect may not have been the most ideal, but it is what it is, and you're at the point you're at now. Moreover, a lot of the times people may seem happy on the surface, but underneath they still have struggles. They still have their own version of problems that you find very challenging right now. I know, for example, the converse of feeling alone and not having companionship, of being in a relationship, is having to make compromise and having to defer to others and have a group consensus when before you were more independent and you were able to go your own way, right? That is a different version of a problem that you necessarily kind of trade off on when you choose to kind of go your own way in a social sense versus you get closer to a single person or you get closer to a group of people as friends. There's always different challenges and different struggles that people have, even though the grass may look greener on the other side. To get into my own personal example, navigating this in-between limbo since really February at this point. So at the end of last year, I had been at my previous employer, one of the FANG tech companies, for about 7 years at that point, 5.5 of them as a full-time employee and a contractor before that. And I was in January taking my sabbatical or paid leave for a month, doing some traveling and having some time to myself. And come February, I distinctly remember it was the night of the Super Bowl. I was supposed to go back to work the next day. I'm working remotely from home, and I just remember dreading it to the point where I was almost musing to myself, like, what if I got laid off tomorrow? And ironically, I didn't even know at that point that layoffs were coming down because I hadn't been following the news as much. I wasn't signed on to all the usual internal channels, so it was kind of not known to me at that point. The next day, the email hits my inbox. You get the sinking feeling in your stomach. You take a second to process. You start telling close friends, family, and start to figure out the next move. But then there's a real emotional weight there. And for anyone who's gone through a similar experience, the emotional timeline is different for everybody. You can try all you want to get over it faster, to focus on what you can control, to take whatever actionable steps that you can, but it's still a real loss. And chances are, if you're invested in any degree to what you do for a living, it's gonna feel like a blow to your identity, to your self-confidence, your sense of self-worth. And that is not something that you can just blow past without some form of reconciliation, without some time to really let it process. I don't profess to have figured anything out completely yet. I've been grinding since February, filing applications, reaching out to people, networking. One of the failings I had in the last few years is I wasn't even really good about adding people on LinkedIn that I had met. A lot of people that I interacted and worked with weren't really in my lane necessarily in terms of the job function that we did. They were all like very high performing. We got along great for the most part, but they just weren't really in the same job family as I was. And so I, in retrospect, didn't really see the value of trying to really actively, network with them, so to speak, and like invest in those relationships beyond whatever it is that we had to do at any given time in terms of work product. So now, unfortunately, I'm in a position where I'm like pretty isolated in that sense. My network is very weak relative to a lot of other people. I haven't talked to a lot of my coworkers, former coworkers, for really long stretches of time. Kind of lost touch. For all I know, most people are in that same lane of like not really being active on LinkedIn until they need to look for a job. So maybe I can get into what's been helping right now, especially for anybody who happens to be seeing this that may be just going through a similar time in your own form or fashion. So obviously I've had a lot more free time on my hands, a lot more mental bandwidth as well than before, almost too much actually. So giving it some kind of structure in terms of how I go about my day has been really important. What's been working reasonably well is I'll kind of carve out Monday, Friday, Wednesday to do like focus more on household stuff, errands, going to the gym, still spend time applying to jobs and reading up on the latest news and whatnot with the market, but having it be less of a focus. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays are completely set aside to read through job descriptions, file applications, work on my resume, take interviews, so on and so forth. I haven't been taking great tabs on it, but I think in the past 5 months now, I've applied to at least a few hundred jobs and have had about 6 to 8 recruiter interviews out of that. And then as the funnel goes, I've had maybe like 6 manager levels and 2 or 3 like later levels, usually involving your peers of the team you're going to be working with, and then your cross-functional partners. And then I haven't really had any with that final level where it's usually like a skip director or some other really senior person that you meet with for more of a vibe check. So that is still to come. I don't know when that's going to get resolved, frankly. From everything I've heard, it could be a matter of months or it could be a matter of years. With the current level of competition that's out there right now, it's really not one of those things that can be predicted in any sort of reliable way. And it is one of those things that is going to feel pretty challenging and difficult while you're going through it, but it'll all hopefully make sense retrospect when you're looking back. And I would like to think that in the longer run, this was the necessary push of sorts to really reconsider what it is that I want to do and ultimately just be realigned with something that's more fulfilling in a very authentic way, in addition to the financial compensation part of it. Doing some sort of journaling and reflection and creative expression like this video can also help in terms of just getting your thoughts out of your head. Something that I found helpful is using ChatGPT as my journal platform to get some like real-time reflection, even if it's like in a very simulated, artificial fashion, and creative expression, even if it's, shooting a simple video like this, getting out of the habit of constantly consuming and actually creating something that could be helpful as well, right? It's taken me, months to get back to this point, but always enjoyed to some degree making content because it was at least like a very low barrier to entry way to create, to bring something new into the world instead of being the one always consuming, always on the receiving end. And as an aside, I had paused making fitness content because I really no longer felt like I had anything novel to say on the subject. Even though I was certified a number of years ago, I still, work out somewhat consistently. I really didn't feel like I had anything new to say on the subject that wasn't already being covered a lot better by other people. And more broadly, I no longer saw potential in myself to be of any help when my own self-belief was in doubt And let's face it, I don't think anybody needs yet another bench press tutorial on the interwebs right now. Another tactic to consider is to really manage your exposure to negativity in terms of news, in terms of information that you consume. I know I myself have been really guilty of doom scrolling just a bit too much on the job search slash like layoff Reddit threads, with the intent of like just being aware of what kind of experiences and what kind of trends are out there. But then sooner or later you get into these rabbit holes where it's just like people piling complaints shit on top of each other, and it's definitely not healthy if that's the bulk of your information consumption for an extended period of time. And then something else I've been thinking about a lot too is that we're living in the time of the grifter economy. We're living in a time of just all kinds of fakery and inauthenticity, trying to pass itself off as genuine, whether it's the deluge of AI slop on our feeds or all the gurus on your IG trying to sell you courses, trying to sell you this delusion of success, with all the usual stuff that I already talked about from before. And if you're not kind of wised up to all that, right, the more time you spend immersed in that stuff, it's all it's going to do is going to make you feel worse about where you already are. It may take a lot of work, but it is, I think, still worth trying to rebuild your relationships wherever they may be at this point, even if you've fallen out of touch with people you cared about from before, even if you feel like, myself, who's been in San Diego for like 4 years at this point and still haven't really recaptured that sense of intimate closeness that I have with any of my newer friends that I've met compared to existing friends that I had, friendships that I remember having back in my 20s. So wherever you are in terms of that, it's worth examining how you can be more proactive, how you can be the one to reach out, even if it means possibly feeling like you're getting rejected in some sense when people don't come through, or you propose some sort of activity but like no one's really that interested and there's no momentum behind it. At the end of the day, that is kind of the cost of doing business, if you will, of furthering friendships. I see so many times in city Reddits even, constantly people are asking how to make new friends, how hard it is to meet new people, especially after like college age, and certainly after your 30s, generally speaking, for most people's life stages. And really a lot of it kind of practically comes down to you have to be the one to reach out more. You have to kind of put yourself on the line a little bit more in some form or fashion, in like low stakes sort of ways. There's just really no other way around that. And granted, it's gonna feel pretty uncomfortable if you've kind of always let the plans come to you, like certainly I have in the past. But just know that if they're the kind of people that you're meant to hang out with and be closer to, you're not gonna be judged as much as you maybe imagined you would for putting yourself out there and inviting a few people to do something, whether it's to get food or go to a show or whatever it is that you may be interested in. They may want to come along or they may not. And if they're not, then no problem. You just try again another day, right? As things occur to you. Anyway, this was not really done with any intention of getting more views or like even really building out this channel or anything like that. It was more just as a vehicle for me to process some of these things that I've been simply thinking about and having on my mind a lot lately. So I guess to close this out, if you're in the same boat, know that as one person, I see you. You're not the only one. This isn't a playbook. This isn't the solve all to anything I brought up. It's not even gonna be that edited, I don't think. I'm just sharing what's helping me stay grounded in a time of great uncertainty to some extent. And hell, even I'm really still in the process of figuring it out one day at a time. So if this has helped in some form or fashion, or at least give you some reassurance that you're not the only one going through a similar experience, maybe leave a comment and I'll make more content similar to this.